So good morning, everyone, colleagues and friends. First and foremost, I wish to express my gratitude to EUMENIA and to Dimitris Boris in particular for organizing this conference and gathering such a pool of distinguished experts, all united by their resolute commitment to constructively and effectively engage on EU-Middle East relations. I'm cognizant of, I particularly commend the organizers of this event for inviting me in my capacity as the new Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory as of 1967 to deliver a keynote speech for this event. I'm cognizant of and concerned by the fact that over the past 30 years, the question of human rights in Palestine has been gradually relegated to the back burner of both EU and Arab politics respectively, and EU-Arab relations as a consequence. Therefore, including my mandate in this event is not a small gesture. And with this in mind, I could not be more honored to accept the invitation to also join, after these keynote remarks, the first panel's debate with the EU Special Representative for the Middle East peace process. I want to be enlightened on the peace process, in fact, and the Director of the Middle East and North Africa Department at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whom I both salute. It is my hope that my presence in this event will serve as a reminder of the moral necessity to work toward a common EU-Middle East agenda focusing on human rights in Israel-Palestine. Such an agenda premised upon legality should be delivered through what I called a five-pronged approach, which includes honesty, accountability, contextualization, moral authority, and continued commitment to multilateralism. I will expand on these 5 points in 5 minutes. But first, let me start from what I see its current reality, so you know what I'm quite critical about. I commend the EU's commitment to supporting the peace process, including significant funding to the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian refugees, primarily through UNRWA, the UN agency I had the privilege to work for a few years, my previous incarnation. Nevertheless, this support is set against a background of constant and increasing reluctance to recognize the situation in the occupied Palestinian territory for what it is, namely an illegal, belligerent occupation that has been the vehicle to establish a system of widespread and systematic violence and oppression of what technically is the occupying power against the Palestinian people. The military occupation that Israel initiated in 1967 over what remained of British Mandate Palestine operates squarely outside the perimeter of what is permitted under international law. It also stands in stark contrast to the essence of what the United Nations represents and what the EU advocates for. That is, a political order premised upon the rule of law, good governance, and respect for fundamental rights and freedom as the necessary conduit for sustainable peace and security and economic development. Let me share some reflections on the individual EU and Arab states' approaches to the situation in occupied Palestine before sharing my views on how a renewed partnership could and should hinge on the resolution of the situation in Palestine as a priority. On the European Union, noting that I speak as a European citizen myself, the Europeans' approach to Israel-Palestine, at least in the last 3 decades, can be condensed into 5 key aspects. As a generous donor to the Palestinian Authority and multilateral system operating in occupied Palestine and in the region, as maintaining close political and economic ties with Israel, as upholding a differentiation policy regarding the Israeli settlement in occupied territory, noting that it has been left to individual member states to decide on how to apply this differentiation policy in their bilateral relations with Israel, an increasingly less united, a softer voice on Israeli practices and their unlawfulness, and finally, as having not employed its considerable economic and political clout to effectively demand respect for basic principles of international law and impose substantive costs on those responsible for its violations. The European Union has directed most of its funds to address the humanitarian dimension of what they call the conflict. This reveals an emergency reflex and a responsive attitude that I find dangerous in the context of occupied Palestine. The situation is not an emergency and should not be treated as such. It is a political reality that requires firm action based on the respect for international law. Since the start of the peace process, which is what our colleague will, I guess, talk about, with the Madrid Conference of 1991, many have argued for the European Union and United Nations to depoliticize their engagement with the issue. This was done by avoiding discussion around and evading measures to tackle the significant human rights violations committed by Israel to the detriment of the Palestinians under occupation. But demoting the need to respect human rights as a precondition to negotiate is both disingenuous and dangerous. It is both a question of optics and substance. One cannot diagnose and treat a problem without first identifying how it emerged, the root causes, and what it is and why it persists. As my predecessor Michael Lynk stated in his report to the General Assembly in 2020, since the European Union joined the Quartet and became part of its policies regarding the roadmap and the 2006 Palestinian elections, its policies and statements regarding the occupation have become more cautious, even as its substantial levels of funding continued. As Professor Link candidly concluded, this has emboldened the occupation, normalized impunity, and supinely condoned the endemic brutalization of an entire people under Israel's effective control. As for the Middle East, where I have had the pleasure to work and live for most of the past 20 years, not 10, I have often defined Arab countries' approach to the question of Palestine as one of unsettling solidarity. Although there seems to be solidarity among Arab rulers toward the Palestinians, there is a reluctance among them to provide consistent and effective support to the resolution of the underlying root causes of their plight. Arab countries have generally, more in words than deeds, supported Palestinians, including refugees, in the name of Arab brotherhood and solidarity, but also despised them as a result of political factors and interests. This is evident in the way Palestinian refugees, Palestinian exiles, Palestinian migrants have been received and treated in Arab countries. Political circumstances surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian reality, as well as shifts in relations between Arab states and the Palestinian leadership, being it the PLO or the Palestinian Authority, have impacted Arab states' approach to the Palestinians. Vindictive policies, often aiming at targeting the PLO, have resulted in punishment of hundreds of thousands and the ongoing displacement of many more. An issue that I have studied and documented is, and it's often unspoken, is that 700,000 Palestinians have been displaced from the Arab regions out of discrimination, persecution, conflict, and poverty. And this is another form of Nakba. While the legacy of Palestinian militant resistance in Arab countries cannot be ignored, the Palestinian people as a whole have paid the brunt for the political deadlock between Israel and Palestine, and this cannot be ignored, as ultimately Palestinian refugees and exiles are the human face of that deadlock. I acknowledge that the economic and political instability of the MENA region that has further diverted the focus of these states. However, the recent proclivity toward normalizing relations with Israel without any attention to the human rights reality on the ground cannot be excused. In the last 2 years, a number of Arab states have openly embraced Israeli partnership in business and culture. The Abraham Accords, signed in 2020, have called for diplomatic relations between Israel and its neighbors and emphasized the need for friendly relations based on shared interests. Such a gesture not only undermines Palestinian peaceful resistance in the Middle East, where historically it has been the strongest, but it also stifles what has been positive international legal momentum, such as the demand for accountability for Israeli alleged war crimes. The normalization of relations with Israel should be, reflect complacence with injustice. As it stands, such normalization cannot be neither encouraged nor rewarded. Fundamentally, it serves to sweep human rights concerns related to occupied Palestine under the rug and eventually forget them for good. It is my hope and wish, but also as a special rapporteur, a heartfelt demand that the EU and Arab countries reconsider their approach to Israel-Palestine and work toward a mutual agenda aimed at restoring legality as the common horizon to deliver peace and prosperity to both Palestinians and Israelis in the region. I have faith that this can happen. And these are my 5 recommendations to make restoration of legality and respect for human rights a moral and political imperative of EU-Arab relations. This is the moment where you really want to take the pen and take notes. First, both European Union and Arab countries, as vocal supporters of the two-state solutions, must take a stand against the politics that have shaped the vast asymmetry in power between Israel and Palestine, and take on a broader agenda for what I call restorative justice that addresses genuinely and respectively the root causes of 100 years of violence and its current ramifications. I particularly emphasize the EU's potential leading role in it, because the EU places emphasis on diplomacy and soft power dynamics in its external relations, including with its southern neighbors. Gradually, Arab countries have also veered toward the same approach. But soft power loses meaning if the emphasis is on softness at the expense of power. And to be effective, soft power requires authority. We have seen that in the response to Russia's unlawful aggression and occupation of Ukraine, in which EU countries acted in unison to preserve and protect a regional and international order premised upon respect for legality. We do not see this response or even a degree of this response to the situation in Palestine. Instead, we observe double standards, which betrays the values championed in the Ukrainian response. Second, accountability. This must be pursued. This can be obtained in various ways. Genuine and impartial investigations into war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in the oPt should be no further delayed. Supporting the investigation of both the ICC and the Human Rights Council-appointed Commission of Inquiry on Israel-Palestine is essential. And I say that particularly for the European Union sitting at the UN Human Rights Council, some members of whom are hostile to this body, and in my view, without any valid reasons. Third, focus on the broader context. What do I mean for that? The Israeli occupation of Palestine has no legal raison d'etre, and it's in breach of at least 3 peremptory norms of international law. Peace, security, and prosperity in the region can only be ensured by realizing the right of self-determination of the Palestinians, which requires the dismantlement of Israel's 50-year-long occupation, including the Gaza blockade and illegal settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israel must also offer appropriate assurances and guarantees of non-repetition, and the responsibility to address the situation is upon all member states. This is what peremptory norms of international law prescribes. The European Union and Arab states should demand cessation, reparation, and guarantees of non-repetitions for these wrongdoings. Failing to do so means enabling further impunity. Fourth, both the EU and the UN provide for diplomatic, political and economic measures to realign states' behaviors with respect for the fundamental rules, including human rights, to preserve regional and multilateral order. Such measures are permitted and even obligatory in the event of a serious breach of an obligation owed to the international community, such as in the case of grave breaches of humanitarian law committed by Israel through continuous forced displacement, arbitrary arrest and detention, and the widespread use of torture, various forms of collective punishment imposed on the Palestinians, and so forth, and so on and so forth. These cannot be evaded. And finally, the international community must continue to support UNRWA's effort in the region, and occupied Palestine in particular. UNRWA's mandate covers an array of programs, including healthcare, food, sanitation, and unfortunately, less international protection than what is utterly needed. Assistance to and protection of Palestinian refugees must be prioritized as a human rights issue and regarded as a means to achieve long-term regional peace, and must be at the center of a renewed, meaningful discussion between the EU and Arab countries. I conclude with the words of Michael Link, my predecessor. It should be clear that the realpolitik playbook for the Middle East peace process is well past its best-by date. More of the same is not working and will not work. The new diplomatic playbook must be endowed with rights and legality at its core. While these are necessary preconditions, they are by themselves insufficient. Imaginative and brave diplomacy and a willingness to finally ask the honest question as to why this 5-decade-old occupation has become indistinguishable from annexation and apartheid is also indispensable. All of these things, together with international application of accountability, could finally enable Palestinians and Israelis to enjoy the prosperity of a shared future together. I thank you all and wish you a productive continuation of the conference.